The blood on my hands wasn't mine. Neither were the accusations that destroyed my life. When they pointed at me as the culpable one for what happened to my own mother and that child, something inside me died. I spent 3 years locked up for something I didn't do, while the real monster was still out there, sleeping in the same bed as my mother every night. Some people think they know my story. Nobody knows it until now. My name is Gabriel. I'm 21 now. I got out of the juvenile detention center almost 8 months ago after losing 3 years of my life for a crime I didn't commit. I know you've probably heard that line before. Everyone claims they're innocent, right? But my case is different. I was accused of something so disgusting, so impossible to imagine, that most people can't even repeat it out loud. They said I got my own mother pregnant and then killed that child, my half-brother. How could anyone believe that? How could they imagine I would be capable of something like that? But they did believe it. All of them. I don't expect you to believe me now. In fact, I understand if your finger is already hovering over the scroll button, ready to move to the next video. Stories like mine make people uncomfortable. It's easier to believe I'm a monster than to face the possibility that the system completely failed, that an entire family was torn apart, that a teenager lost years of his life because of a lie. But if you're really paying attention, if you can see beyond what they say about me, I need to ask you something. Like this video now, subscribe to Traumatic Accounts, hit the notification bell, and comment where you're watching from, because believe me, this isn't a story you'll find just anywhere. And what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about justice, family, and how far someone will go to hide the truth. I've never spoken publicly about this. After I got out, I tried to forget, to move on, but the accusations follow me like shadows. People still look at me like I'm a monster. And maybe, if you hear the whole story, you'll understand why I finally decided to expose everything. Not for revenge, although I won't deny part of me wants that, but because the truth needs to be told. Here in this small apartment I managed to rent after I got out, far from the town where I grew up, I'm finally ready to tell what really happened. How a manipulative stepfather, a vulnerable mother, and a flawed system destroyed a teenager's life. And what I did when I finally understood that nobody would believe me. You think you know stories of injustice? You have no idea. So, stay until the end, because what I'm going to reveal about that night, about what happened in the basement, will completely change your perception of this story. I was born into a normal family, at least in the beginning. My mother, Helena, had me young at 19. My biological father, Richard, couldn't handle the pressure and disappeared before I was even born. I grew up with just her until I was 10. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. She worked as a nurse at a local hospital, sometimes doing double shifts, but always finding a way to be present for important things. Our house was small but cozy. I was a normal kid, played football in the street, had friends at school, got average grades. Helena was strict about studies and behavior, but also affectionate. I remember her waiting for me with hot chocolate on winter nights, teaching me to ride a bike at the park near our house, defending me when the school principal wrongly accused me of breaking a window. It was us against the world, and it worked well that way. Everything changed when Matt entered our lives. He showed up at the hospital where my mom worked, a patient with a broken arm after a motorcycle accident, tall, strong, with that kind of smile women seem to find irresistible. He was 35, owned an auto repair shop, and had apparently just gotten divorced. The perfect story to win over a lonely 29-year-old nurse raising a son by herself. At first, Matt seemed cool. He would take me for rides on his motorcycle, hidden from my mom, bring presents, tell stories about trips he'd taken. Helena was radiant. I had never seen her so happy. After 6 months of dating, he moved into our house. That's when I noticed the first signs. Matt had strange rules. I couldn't enter their room without knocking 3 times and waiting for permission. I couldn't use the phone after 9 p.m. I couldn't invite friends over without giving 3 days' notice. Small things that my mom justified as organization or respect for the couple's space. But there was something in his look when I disobeyed, a calculating coldness that made me freeze inside. When I was 12, things started getting more intense. Matt began controlling the household money. My mom, who had always been independent, now had to ask permission to buy anything. He said he was organizing the finances so they could buy a bigger house. Helena believed him, or pretended to. He also started cutting my mom off from her friends and my Aunt Cecilia, her only sister. They're jealous, They're trying to manipulate you. They just want to take advantage of your kindness. One by one, the bonds were cut. Calls to my grandmother, who lived in another state, became increasingly rare and always with him nearby, listening to every word. At school, my performance started dropping. How could I concentrate when I returned home with a knot in my stomach, not knowing what mood Matt would be in? I tried talking to the school counselor once. She asked if there was physical violence at home. There wasn't. Not yet, anyway. I said no. She advised me to give myself time to adapt to the new family configuration. Time, as if that would fix anything. When I turned 13, Matt finally showed his true face. It was on a Sunday afternoon. My mom was on shift at the hospital and I was watching TV. He came home drunk, smelling of cigarettes and women's perfume. When I questioned where he'd been, he grabbed me by my shirt collar. "You're nothing here, kid, nothing. You're only in this house because I allow it. Your father ran away because he knew you weren't worth the effort. I'm the man of this house now, and you're going to learn to stay quiet and obey." That night, I told my mom everything about the threat, about the smell of women's perfume. She listened in silence, eyes fixed on the wall, then hugged me tight and promised she would talk to him. The next day, Matt appeared in my room with a new PlayStation. An apology for the misunderstanding. My mom smiled beside him, relieved she didn't have to face reality. That's when I understood. I was alone in this. The following years were an exercise in survival. I learned to become invisible in my own home. I spent as much time as possible at school, in the library, at friends' houses, anywhere but there. But Matt's tentacles were long. He began limiting my time away, demanding I come straight home after school. "For your safety," he told my mom, who increasingly agreed, becoming more and more faded, less and less the strong woman who raised me. At 14, I noticed purple bruises on my mom's arm. When I asked, she said she'd hit a cabinet at the hospital pharmacy. A week later, there were more bruises, another cabinet, another excuse. Her eyes, once alive and bright, now seemed dull, distant. She started taking medication for sleep, for anxiety. Sometimes she spent entire weekends in bed, resting. It was during this time that I discovered what Matt did when he went out at night. He had another family, a woman, and a little daughter in a neighboring town. I found receipts, photos on his cell phone that I checked secretly once. I confronted my mom with the evidence. She cried, promised she would resolve everything, that she would end things with him. A week later, Matt was still there, and she acted as if our conversation had never happened. I started documenting everything, taking pictures of her bruises with an old hidden phone, recording arguments, noting dates and times of his departures. I didn't know exactly what I would do with it, but I needed proof, something concrete, maybe for the police, maybe to convince my mom when she was finally ready to see the truth. When I was 15, Helena announced she was pregnant. The news hit like a bomb. Matt, who had always made it clear he only tolerated me because of my mom, would now be a father. Father to my half-brother or half-sister. The idea made me physically sick. "This will change everything, Gabriel," my mom said with a fragile smile and eyes that begged me to share her false joy. "We'll be a real family now." Matt seemed strangely satisfied, not happy like a first-time dad, but like someone who had just secured his permanent place in the house. He became even more controlling with my mom, what she ate, who she talked to, where she went. "Taking care of the baby's health," he said. And my mom, now completely under his control, obeyed without question. Gradually, I was pushed further away. The small guest room would be the baby's room. Matt started talking about when Gabriel goes to college, when Gabriel moves out, as if he couldn't wait to get rid of me. My things began to be moved to the basement. First some books, then my computer. Finally my bed. "You need your space," my mom justified. "A teenager needs privacy." What she didn't say was that Matt didn't want to see me. The basement was cold and damp with a small window that barely let in light. I started avoiding being home even more. At school, my behavior worsened. I got into fights, talked back to teachers. A way of crying for help, I suppose. Nobody listened. One night I came home late from a group project. The house was quiet, but there was something strange in the air, a palpable tension. I went to the basement and tried to sleep, but sounds woke me around 3 a.m. Muffled screams, breaking glass. I silently climbed the stairs. Their bedroom door was slightly open. I saw my mom huddled in the corner, hand over her face, blood trickling between her fingers. Matt was pacing back and forth, whispering threats that chilled my blood. "You think I don't know? You think I'm an idiot? That baby isn't even mine. Whose is it?" My mom denied between sobs, swearing the child was his. He accused her of cheating, mentioning hospital shift schedules that didn't match up, suspicious calls, all delusions from his sick, controlling mind, or maybe projections of his own infidelity. I wanted to go in, defend my mom. But I froze. I was 15, still smaller than him, weaker. What could I do except make everything worse? I went back to the basement, trembling, crying silently. That night I promised myself, as soon as I turned 16, I would get a job, save money, and get my mom out of that house. I would save her, save my unborn brother or sister. We would escape, but fate had other, much crueler plans than I could imagine. My mom's pregnancy progressed, and with it, Matt's behavior became more erratic. There were days when he acted like the perfect father and husband, bought gifts, talked about plans for the future, even treated me with forced cordiality. On other days, he transformed into a monster. He accused my mom of cheating, ransacked her things looking for evidence, followed her to work to ensure she went straight to the hospital. When I had just turned 16, I got a job after school at a fast food place. I didn't tell anyone at home. I said I was studying at the library or at friends' houses. I hid the money in a box buried in the small backyard. My plan was to save enough to rent a small place where my mom, the baby, and I could stay away from Matt. One afternoon, I came home early from work. Business was slow, and the manager sent some employees home. The house seemed empty, but I heard voices coming from what would be the baby's room. Matt was there with a man I had never seen before. "DNA tests can be done during pregnancy, you know," the man was saying. "It's not as invasive as it used to be." "How much does it cost?" Matt asked. "Depends. The official one through the hospital leaves records. If you want something more discreet, as you mentioned, it costs more." I silently backed away and left the house. My brain was working overtime. Matt was truly convinced the baby wasn't his. He was planning to do a clandestine DNA test. What would he do if he confirmed his paranoid suspicions? My fear for the baby, for my mom, for myself, grew even more. I tried talking to Helena that night when Matt went out to the shop. She was in her 7th month, tired, with deep circles under her eyes. "Mom, we need to get out of here. He's not well. I'm afraid of what he might do to you, to the baby." She seemed to momentarily wake from her stupor. "What are you talking about, Gabriel?" "Matt, Mom. He's dangerous, you know that. The bruises, the accusations. Today he brought someone to talk about a DNA test for the baby." Her face paled, but soon after she shook her head as if pushing away an uncomfortable thought. "You're making things up. Matt is stressed with the shop, with the responsibilities of a new child. It's normal." "Normal? He hits you. He thinks you cheated on him. That's not normal." "Enough," she shouted, surprising us both. "Don't you understand? You never understood. Matt gave us a home, stability. Without him, what would we have? Where would we be?" "We'd have each other," I replied, voice breaking. "Like we always had." She looked away and caressed her belly. "Gabriel, when this baby is born, you'll see. Everything will get better. A child changes people." I realized it was useless. My mom was trapped not just by fear, but by an emotional dependence I couldn't understand. I decided I would continue with my plan, even if I had to drag her away from there. 2 weeks later, everything fell apart. I came home from school and found the house turned upside down. Furniture out of place, drawers open, clothes scattered. I called for my mom in panic. No one answered. I ran upstairs and found her in the bathroom, huddled in the corner, crying silently. "He found them," she whispered. "Found what?" I didn't understand immediately. "The letters." Then she explained between sobs. Years ago, when Matt started showing his controlling side, she had tried to contact my biological father, Richard, not to get back together, but to ask for financial help, maybe a way out. The letters were never sent. She lost her courage, but kept them in a box at the bottom of the closet. "He thinks the baby is Richard's. He thinks I've been in contact with him all these years, that I've been with him recently." My blood froze. "Where's Matt now?" "He left," she said. "Said he needed to think that when he comes back." She couldn't finish the sentence. That was the opportunity I had been waiting for. I told her about the money I had saved, about my plan. "We can go now, Mom. Catch a bus to Grandma's. He wouldn't find us there." For a moment, I saw hope in her eyes. She even started to get up, supporting herself on the sink. Then, we heard the sound of Matt's car parking. Panic took over her. "Go to the basement," she whispered urgently. "Don't come out until I call you. Promise." I hesitated, but the desperation in her voice convinced me. I went down to the basement and closed the door, heart pounding in my chest. I heard Matt's heavy footsteps entering the house, his altered voice calling for my mom. Then, silence, an agonizing silence that seemed to last forever. I was about to go up against her orders when I heard a scream that froze my soul. I ran up the stairs and found my mom collapsed in the hallway, a pool of blood forming beneath her. Matt was standing next to her, looking at his own hands, as if not recognizing what he had done. "The baby?" she moaned, grabbing my arm. "It's coming too early." I ran to the phone and called 911, shouting the address. When I turned around, Matt had disappeared. I went back to my mom, trying to comfort her, helpless in the face of the blood and her pain. The ambulance arrived in 10 minutes, which felt like hours. The paramedics quickly put her on a stretcher. One of them asked me what happened. "My stepfather," I began to say, but my mom squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I fell," she said, her voice weak but determined. "I slipped on the stairs." The paramedic looked from one to the other, clearly suspicious, but the priority was getting her to the hospital. I got in the ambulance with her, holding her hand the whole time. At the hospital, I was prevented from entering the emergency room. I stayed in the hallway, trembling, covered with her blood, trying to call my grandmother, my Aunt Cecilia. No one answered. Hours later, a doctor came out to talk to me. His grave expression said it all before he even opened his mouth. "The baby didn't make it," he said in the rehearsed voice of someone who has given bad news too many times. "Your mother is stable, but she lost a lot of blood. It was a boy, a brother. I had a brother for a few brief moments, and now I didn't anymore." I felt a physical pain, as if something inside me had been ripped out. "Can I see her?" The doctor hesitated. "She's sedated now. Maybe tomorrow. Do you have any adults who can stay with you?" Before I could answer, a social worker appeared, accompanied by 2 police officers. Her face was a mask of false compassion. "Gabriel, can we talk for a moment?" I was taken to a small room where they bombarded me with questions. What happened? Where was my stepfather? Had there been violence in the home before? Why did my mom say she fell when there were clear signs of assault? I told them everything. The years of terrible things, Matt's accusations, the letters to my biological father, what I witnessed that day. I mentioned the photos I had taken of her bruises, stored on my old cell phone. I talked about the man who came to talk about DNA tests. I thought they were listening to me, that finally someone would believe me, but there was something in their looks, something I couldn't identify at the time, but which I later recognized as suspicion. Not of Matt, but of me. I was sent to a neighbor's house that night since they hadn't been able to contact any family members. The next day, when I returned to the hospital to see my mom, I was prevented from entering the room. A police officer was at the door. "Sorry, kid." Orders. Later that day, I discovered why. Matt had returned, and the story he told turned my world upside down. According to him, he had discovered weeks ago that my mom and I were having an inappropriate relationship, that the baby was mine, that when he confronted my mom that day, I attacked him, pushed my mom down the stairs to hide our guilt, and ran away. He said he came back to seek justice for the innocent baby who died because of our sick secret. And the worst part, my mom, still sedated, vulnerable, manipulated by him at the hospital bedside, confirmed his version. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of guilt for not protecting me all those years, maybe because the drugs and trauma made her suggestible. She confirmed the monstrous lie. In a single day, I transformed from a concerned son and grieving brother into a monster in the eyes of the law, the community, and even my own mother. And so began my real nightmare. I was taken directly from the neighbor's house to the police station, where I spent the night in a cold interrogation room, being bombarded with questions that made me want to vomit. The accusations were so absurd, so impossible, that at first I thought it would just be a matter of time until they discovered the truth. I insisted they check my old cell phone, where the photos documenting Matt's abuse were stored. When they finally brought it, it had been completely reset. All evidence erased. Convenient, commented one of the detectives with a cruel smile. The baby's DNA would be the definitive proof, I thought. It would prove Matt was the father, not me. But when I mentioned this, the other police officer shook his head. It's already been requested by the prosecution, but even if the test proves you're not the father, that doesn't rule out what happened in that house. The assault, the fall. I didn't immediately understand what he meant, but it would soon become clear. I was transferred to a juvenile detention center while awaiting the hearing. There, I quickly discovered what it meant to be accused of what they accused me of. Even among juvenile offenders, there's a hierarchy, and I was at the bottom of it. Rumors about my case spread like wildfire, distorted, exaggerated, becoming more and more monstrous with each retelling. I was attacked on the third day. A group of 5 older boys ambushed me in the bathroom. I woke up in the infirmary with 2 broken ribs and an eye so swollen I couldn't open it. That's when I met Rita, a social worker assigned to my case. Unlike the other adults I had encountered so far, she seemed truly willing to listen. Your mom changed her statement, she told me during our second conversation. Now she says she doesn't exactly remember how she fell. A spark of hope lit up inside me. That doesn't mean she's supporting your version, Rita continued cautiously. Just that she's no longer actively corroborating your stepfather's version. She's confused, traumatized. And Matt? I asked. He's maintaining the same story and has been very present by her side in the hospital. Rarely leaves her alone. Controlling her, I understood, making sure she didn't say too much. The following weeks were a blur of preliminary hearings, psychological evaluations, and more assaults at the detention center. The case had leaked to the local press, without names because I was a minor, but with enough details that anyone in the community knew who it was about. My name, even though not officially published, became synonymous with perversion. The DNA test finally came back, proving Matt was the baby's biological father, not me, as if that had ever been a real possibility. I thought it would be enough, that the charges would be dropped, but they weren't. Now the narrative had subtly changed. I had attacked my mom out of jealousy, out of anger, when I discovered the baby was Matt's, not mine. The idea that I would even want that baby to be mine was so repulsive, so beyond comprehension, that it made me physically sick every time it was insinuated. The trial date was set. Rita did what she could to prepare my defense, but the circumstantial evidence seemed to pile up against me. My problems at school, the fights, the basement where I lived, presented by the prosecution as my isolationist choice, not the forced exile it really was. The money I secretly saved was described as planning an escape after the crime. A week before the trial began, I received an unexpected visit at the detention center. My Aunt Cecilia. I hadn't seen her in years since Matt started cutting my mom off from her family. She was older, thinner, with deep lines of worry on her face. I don't believe any of this. Those were her first words. I've known you since you were born, Gabriel. I know what kind of boy you are. I cried for the first time since it all began. Not from sadness or despair, but from relief that someone, finally someone, believed in me. Cecilia had made a monumental effort to visit me. Matt had blocked any access from the family to my mom, telling the doctors that visits made her agitated. My aunt managed to see her only once for a few minutes when Matt went out to get coffee. She's different, Gabriel, like an empty shell. She barely reacted when I walked into the room. The doctors say it's postpartum depression aggravated by trauma, but it's more than that. It's as if she's simply given up. Before leaving, Cecilia handed me a letter. I couldn't bring much. They search everything. But this got through security. Read it when you're alone. The letter was from Laura, my only true friend from school, who had moved away the year before. She wrote that she had returned to town to visit relatives and heard the rumors about me. But most importantly, she had seen something on the night everything happened. I was coming back from my cousin's house, the letter said. I passed by your house around 8 p.m. I saw Matt leaving in a hurry, throwing something in the trash on the corner. He looked disturbed. The next morning, I heard about what happened and kept wondering if what I saw had any connection. That letter was like a ray of light in my dark world. A witness, someone who saw Matt that night acting suspiciously. I showed the letter to Rita immediately, begging her to locate Laura to interview her. This could help, Rita said cautiously. But we need more, much more. The trial began the following week. It was a surreal experience. hearing people talk about me as if I were a monster, as if I were capable of the unthinkable. Neighbors testified about strange behavior that never existed. Teachers mentioned my isolation and growing hostility, reinterpreting years of silent suffering as signs of perversion. Matt played the role of devastated stepfather to perfection, tears at the right moments, a choked voice as he described how he tried to help me all these years. He told how he discovered the supposed relationship between me and my mom, how he tried to intervene to save the baby. Every word a carefully constructed lie that made my stomach turn. My mom didn't testify, still too fragile, according to the doctors. In reality, I later found out, Matt kept her so drugged on anxiety medication that she barely knew where she was. Rita did the best she could with our limited defense. She presented my school records from the years before Matt's arrival, showing that I was a normal boy with no behavioral problems. She brought Laura's testimony, who confirmed seeing Matt throwing something away that night, although she couldn't confirm what. She questioned the logic of the accusation. Why would I get my own mother pregnant? How would it even be possible without Matt, who lived in the same house, knowing? But the doubt had already been planted, the disgust instilled. In the jurors' eyes, I saw revulsion every time they looked in my direction. Logic or evidence didn't matter. The mere suggestion of what I was accused of was enough to condemn me. On the third day of the trial, something unexpected happened. Cecilia had finally obtained a court order to visit my mom in the hospital, accompanied by an independent doctor. This doctor's report was presented to the court. Helena was being kept in an unnecessary state of sedation, her medications controlled exclusively by Matt, without proper medical supervision. The doctor expressed serious concerns about coercion and possible manipulation of a vulnerable patient. It was the first time I saw Matt lose his composure. His face contorted into an expression of anger when the report was read. A brief break in the mask of loving stepfather that he wore so well. It lasted only a second, but it was enough for some in the courtroom to see. The judge ordered my mom to be transferred to another hospital where she would receive proper treatment, away from Matt's influence. It was the first small victory in an ocean of defeats. But it wasn't enough. The narrative was already established. I was the monster, Matt the collateral victim. At best, the report raised doubts about how he dealt with my mom after the trauma I caused, not about his guilt in what really happened. The night before the verdict, sitting alone in my cell, I made a decision. If I was going to be convicted anyway, and everything indicated I would be, I would at least make it clear to the court, to the world, who Matt really was. The next day, when given the right to final words before the jury's deliberation, I stood up. My hands were trembling, but my voice was firm. I know you've already decided, I began. I know what you think of me. But before this farce ends, I want everyone in this room to know exactly who Matt Rivers is. The judge threatened to silence me, but I continued. I spoke loudly, clearly, looking directly at Matt while detailing every abuse he had committed against my mother and against me. I told about the nights when I heard him hitting her, while I, locked in the basement, could do nothing. I described how he isolated us, how he controlled every aspect of our lives. He accuses me of something unthinkable, because he knew it would be easier for you to believe that than the truth. That he pushed my mom down the stairs when she finally threatened to leave him, when she finally gathered courage after years of abuse. And the baby, my brother, was just collateral damage in his rage. I saw the faces in the courtroom, some shocked, others skeptical, some even moved. Matt kept his face impassive, but his eyes burned with hatred. I was removed from the room for disrupting order, but I didn't care. I had said what I needed to say. The verdict came hours later, guilty, not of the original crime. The monstrous accusation was formally withdrawn after the DNA test and new evidence, but of aggravated assault. According to the final version accepted by the court, I had attacked my mom during an argument about the baby, causing her accidental fall. It wasn't premeditated, they agreed, but still a violent act with tragic consequences. I was sentenced to 3 years in a juvenile detention center, with the possibility of parole after 30 months for good behavior. Matt smiled discreetly when the sentence was read. He had won, for now. On the way out of the courtroom, already handcuffed, Cecilia approached me. "We'll prove your innocence," she whispered. "She'll wake up from this nightmare, and then he'll pay." I didn't answer. I wasn't so sure anymore if my mom would ever wake up. Years of manipulation followed by trauma and heavy medication. Perhaps the Helena I knew, The strong mother who raised me alone was already lost forever. As the police car took me away, I had a last glimpse of Matt leaving the courthouse, reporters surrounding him, his expression perfectly calibrated between sadness and relief. A consummate actor, a monster disguised as a man. That's when I made my real decision. In the detention center, I would be the model inmate. I would study, behave, earn privileges. And when I got out, because one day I would use every lesson Matt had unwittingly taught me about patience, about planning, about how to hide your true intentions. And then, finally, I would get justice. The 3 years in the detention center were easier than I imagined. When you've already lived in hell, any other place seems bearable. I kept my head down, dedicated myself to studies, participated in all the therapies offered. The psychologist noted with satisfaction my progress, my acceptance of responsibility. Few knew that each session, each conversation was just another step toward my true goal. I received news from the outside world through Cecilia, who visited me regularly. My mom, kept away from Matt by court order, slowly began to recover physically, but remained emotionally distant, confused about what had really happened. Sometimes she recognized me in the photos Cecilia showed, other times she didn't. The doctors couldn't say if the damage was permanent or if eventually her memories would reorganize themselves. Matt, meanwhile, tried to contest the restraining order several times, always claiming concern about Helena's condition. Fortunately, the independent doctor's report weighed enough to keep him away. Even so, he continued living in the same town, working at the same shop, probably already looking for his next victim. In my second year of detention, I received news that changed everything. My mom had attempted suicide, survived, but the incident forced a complete reevaluation of her case. During the subsequent hospitalization, under different medication and with new doctors, she began to speak. Fragments at first, then more complete stories about Matt, about the abuse, about the night she lost the baby. Her statements were inconsistent, sometimes confused, but had constant elements. Matt pushing her, Matt inventing the story about me, Matt threatening to hurt me if she didn't confirm his version. It wasn't a perfect testimony. Her fragile mental condition made everything questionable, but it was enough to reopen the investigation. New evidence emerged. A nurse at the hospital remembered hearing Matt threatening my mom when he thought no one was around. The contents of the trash where Laura saw him throwing something that night had never been investigated, but neighbors confirmed seeing him nervously digging through it hours after I was already in police custody. Gradually, the tide began to turn. Not quickly, not completely, but enough that 6 months before expected, I received parole. The judge recognized newly discovered mitigating circumstances and ordered my immediate release. I left the center last winter. Cecilia was waiting outside, aged by years of struggle, but smiling like I hadn't seen her smile in a long time. "He's been indicted," were her first words. "Not for what he did to your mom. We still don't have enough evidence, but for fraud. Apparently, he's been diverting money from her account for years. It's a start." A start, yes. Not complete justice, but a crack in Matt's armor of invincibility. A crack that I intended to exploit and expand until he lost everything, just as he did to us. I initially lived with Cecilia. My mom was still in treatment at a specialized trauma clinic. She could receive visits, but the doctors suggested waiting. My presence could trigger memories she wasn't yet prepared for. I got this small apartment 2 months ago. It's not much, but it's mine. Clean, safe, without basements, without secrets. I work part-time at a bookstore and study for the exams that will eventually allow me to enter college. A normal life, or as close to it as someone with my past can aspire to. Matt is still out there. The fraud process drags on, but at least now people look at him differently. The mask has begun to fall. I heard he's lost customers at the shop, that he's no longer so welcome at church. Small victories. People ask me if I want revenge. Part of me, the dark part that grew in the basement of that house under years of abuse and neglect, says, yes, wants to see him suffer as we did, wants justice in its rawest and most direct form. But the other part, the one that survived, the one that still believes in rebuilding, knows that the real triumph is to live well, to build something from the ruins, to show that he didn't break me, not completely. I still visit my mom every week. On the last visit, she held my hand for a moment and said my name, just that, Gabriel. but her eyes were clear when she said it. Present. She held my hand for a moment and said my name. Just that, Gabriel, but her eyes were clear when she said it. Present. It was the best gift I've received in years. I don't know what the future holds. If Matt will face all the consequences he deserves. If my mom will ever fully recover. If the shadows I carry will ever completely disappear. But I'm here. I survived. And each day is a small victory against everything that tried to destroy me. If you've made it this far and truly understood my story, if somehow it touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Traumatic Accounts, hit the notification bell, and comment what time it is where you are right now as you're watching this. Your support means a lot to me, not just as validation of my experience, but as proof that there are people willing to listen, to understand, to not judge quickly. This is my story. Not perfect, not complete, maybe not fully resolved yet, but it's true. And sometimes, in a world of carefully constructed lies, the truth is the only weapon we have. Here in this small apartment that I can finally call my own, I begin to rebuild what was broken. One day at a time, one truth at a time, one small victory against the darkness that almost consumed me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. Maybe that's all any of us really needs.